The desert stretched endlessly under the blazing sun. Golden dunes rolled like waves across the horizon, their edges sharp and bright beneath the light. The heat pressed down heavily, and every step felt like a struggle against both time and nature. In the middle of this vast land, a small group of men worked together, brushing sand away from stone fragments and carefully setting up tools. Among them was a young scholar named Daniel. Daniel had come on this expedition to learn, to see the history of the desert with his own eyes. Books and dusty libraries had prepared him for ancient names and forgotten empires, but nothing had prepared him for the silence of the desert. It was not the quiet of a peaceful place, but the kind that carried weight, as if the land itself held its breath. The leader of the expedition, Professor Harris, was a man of experience and strong will. His gray beard and sharp eyes gave him an air of wisdom. For years, he had dreamed of finding something untouched, something that could change how people understood the past. Many sites had been uncovered before, but most had already been looted centuries earlier. This valley, however, was different. It was isolated, far from the pops traders once used, and almost forgotten. Daniel's job was to record everything they found. He carried notebooks filled with sketches of pottery fragments, carvings, and stone tools. He was careful, always observing and writing, while Harris was bold, pushing his team to move faster. The workers they had hired were skilled with digging, yet even they moved with caution. The desert had its own rules, and they knew not to anger it. One afternoon, after hours of digging beneath the harsh sun, Daniel's hands brushed against something hard. At first, he thought it was another stone buried in the sand, but when he cleared the surface, he saw carvings. The lines were faint but deliberate, shaped into patterns that did not appear natural. His heart quickened. He called for Harris, who hurried over, his eyes wide with interest. They knelt together and brushed the sand aside. Slowly, a rectangular stone emerged, half buried in the earth. Strange markings covered its face, symbols Daniel had never seen in any book. They were curved, almost like waves or coils of rope, crossing one another in repeating designs. The stone felt ancient, untouched by human hands for countless years. Harris leaned close and studied the carvings. "This is older than anything we have seen," he said with quiet excitement. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. "Mark this location. We may have stumbled on something remarkable." The workers gathered around, murmuring to one another in low voices. Daniel could not understand their words, but the tone was clear. Fear. They stepped back, refusing to touch the stone. One of them, an older man named Musa who had guided the team through the valley, spoke firmly. He told Harris that this was not a place to dig. His lined face carried both strength and worry as he explained in his language that the stone was a warning. Harris shook his head. "There are always stories," he said, dismissing the warning with a wave of his hand. "Every village has tales of curses and forbidden places. Yet history is built on finding what others fear to see." But Daniel noticed the way Musa looked at the stone. It was not the gaze of a man moved by superstition alone. It was the look of someone who had grown up hearing the weight of a warning, passed down through generations. Daniel felt uneasy, though he said nothing. That evening, as the sun sank below the dunes, painting the sky with deep red and gold, the team sat around a fire. The desert grew cold quickly, and the warmth of the flames was a comfort. The workers stayed apart, whispering among themselves. Musa stared into the fire with troubled eyes. Daniel sat with his notebook, sketching the markings from memory. The symbols tugged at his thoughts, strange and unsettling. He remembered the way the air had felt when they uncovered the stone, still and heavy, as if the desert itself had paused. It was not something he could easily explain, but it clung to him. Later that night, Daniel walked a short distance from the camp. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the sand. The valley stretched out in every direction, silent and endless. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the dunes. It was beautiful, yet there was a weight beneath it all, a feeling that something slept beneath the sands, waiting. In the days that followed, the team continued to clear the site, more stones emerged, forming what appeared to be the entrance to a larger structure buried below. The workers grew restless. Some refused to return, packing their things and leaving. Musa stayed, though he warned again that they should not go further. Daniel watched the professor's excitement grow. Harris spoke of glory, of discoveries that would reshape history. Daniel wanted to share that excitement, but he could not shake the unease that grew in him each day. The carvings seemed to watch him as he sketched them, and at night he sometimes thought he heard the wind carry whispers, though no one else reacted. One afternoon, as the sun hung high and the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, Daniel touched the surface of one of the stones they had uncovered. It was warm, almost hot, though it lay in the shadow of the valley wall. He pulled his hand back quickly, glancing round. No one else seemed to notice. He wrote it down in his notebook, though he did not tell the professor. The valley, once only sand and silence, had become a place filled with tension. Every step deeper into the earth felt like a step into a story that did not want to be told. Daniel thought again of Musa's warning, of the fear in the workers' eyes, and he began to wonder if the desert itself wanted them gone. But Harris pressed forward, certain that they had found something greater than any other discovery of their time. He called it the find of the century, a treasure buried beneath centuries of shifting sand. Daniel, standing at the edge of the pit they had dug, looked down at the stones forming the outline of what seemed to be a doorway. His heart pounded. He knew they had uncovered more than ruins. They had uncovered a secret, and secrets, once disturbed, rarely rested again. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long shadows across the dunes. The camp stirred to life as Daniel and the workers prepared to continue their excavation. The air was dry and still, carrying the faint scent of hot sand and stone. Despite the calm, a tension hung over the sight, a quiet unease that seemed to grow with each passing hour. Musa, the older villager who had guided them through the valley, walked toward the camp with measured steps. His dark eyes were steady, yet they carried the weight of concern. Daniel noticed the way the other workers fell silent as Musa approached. Even the most skeptical among them seemed to sense that his presence brought a warning rather than comfort. "Professor." Harris greeted Musa with a polite nod, though his eyes sparkled with impatience. "Good morning," he said. "Do you bring more guidance for us today?" Musa shook his head slowly. "I bring a warning," he said. His voice was deep and calm, but it carried an authority that made Daniel pause. "This place is not meant for men to disturb. The tomb that lies beneath the sand holds the rest of a ruler who angered the gods. He was sealed away, and his sleep should not be broken. Those who open the door will invite danger upon themselves." The workers murmured among themselves, exchanging nervous glances. Some stepped back as if the mere words could push them away from the pit. Daniel felt a chill despite the heat of the morning sun. Harris's brow furrowed. "Danger, Musa? We are historians and explorers, not children afraid of shadows. Every site and every desert has stories. If we stop because of fear, nothing would ever be discovered." Musa's eyes narrowed slightly. "This is not a story, Professor. This is truth. My ancestors warned that men would come here, and they would not leave untouched. The ruler beneath the sand sought immortality. He was punished, and the punishment rests here still. Those who take what is not theirs will regret it." Daniel listened carefully. He had always respected history, but he was not sure how to judge. A warning carried for generations? Could it be superstition? Or was there something more to Musa's words? He had felt the heaviness in the air the first day they uncovered the stone. Now, Musa's warning made it impossible to ignore. The professor waved a hand dismissively. "We will respect local customs when necessary, but our work cannot stop because of old tales. History is not written by fear. We must continue." Daniel looked around at the workers. A few nodded nervously, but most hung back, unwilling to risk angering what they did not understand. Even Musa seemed to know that words alone could not prevent Harris from moving forward. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel returned to his notes. He sketched the markings on the stone, copying each curve and line with care. The symbols seemed to carry meaning beyond decoration. Some appeared like waves, others like spirals, and a few resembled eyes staring back at him. Daniel shivered slightly. He could not explain why he felt watched, yet the sensation refused to leave him. By midday, Harris ordered the team to dig deeper. The workers moved with caution, but Daniel noticed the tension in their movements. Each scoop of sand felt heavy, almost as if the earth itself resisted their intrusion. As they cleared more stones, a faint outline of a doorway became visible, partially hidden by centuries of drifting sand. Musa approached Daniel quietly while the others labored. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice low. "The air grows heavier here. The tomb is not empty. The ruler's spirit remains. If you go inside, you will not leave unchanged." Daniel nodded slowly, unable to find words. He had felt the same sensation the first day, a weight pressing on his chest. It was not fear in the usual sense, but a warning that came from the land itself. He glanced at the professor, who crouched near the doorway, examining the stones with bright eyes and a restless hand. Harris seemed unaware of the tension that gripped Daniel and the others. The workers hesitated at the edge of the pit. Some whispered prayers under their breath, while others silently moved to the shade of nearby rocks. Musa's warning had shaken them. He had said little, yet his presence reminded everyone that not all knowledge was meant to be uncovered. By late afternoon, a sudden gust of wind swept across the valley. Sand rose in waves, and the temperature dropped slightly as the desert clouded over. Daniel shielded his eyes, peering through the storm. He could see the outline of the tomb's entrance more clearly. Now, a dark rectangle set into the golden sand. For a moment, it seemed as if the doorway had been waiting, hidden and patient, for men to arrive. The workers murmured nervously, and Musa stepped forward. "This is a warning," he said, raising his hands. "Leave the tomb. Do not touch what should not be touched. The desert remembers those who disturb the dead." Harris shook his head. "I will not leave," he said firmly. "We are close to something remarkable. Imagine what we will learn. Imagine the history we will reveal. We cannot turn back now." Daniel felt a conflict rise within him. He wanted to follow the professor, to continue the work, but Musa's warning tugged at his mind. The desert, the wind, and the strange weight in the air all seemed to speak in the same voice. What they were uncovering might not be a simple tomb. It might be something far older, something that carried consequences beyond their understanding. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the dunes, Daniel sat beside the fire with Musa. The older man spoke of the ruler buried beneath the sand, a king who defied the old gods and sought immortality. He was powerful, Musa said, but greed led him to break laws older than any kingdom. The people rose, and the gods punished him. His body was sealed away, and the chest beside him contains what he could not take to eternity. Disturb it, and you disturb his anger. Daniel listened closely, writing every word in his notebook. The firelight flickered across Musa's face, and for the first time, Daniel felt the truth of the warning. History was not only about discovery, it was about respect for the past and the lives, even the wrongdoings, that had shaped it. The night passed with uneasy sleep. Daniel dreamed of sand shifting endlessly, of a shadow moving beneath the dunes, and of eyes watching him from the darkness. He awoke with a start as the first light of dawn touched the camp. The desert seemed calm again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. As he stepped outside, Daniel saw Harris examining the doorway once more. The professor's excitement was undeniable. Yet Daniel knew that the path forward carried a weight none of them fully understood. He glanced at Musa, whose face was lined with worry, and Daniel realized that some warnings were meant to be heard. Some secrets in the desert had been preserved for a reason. The tomb waited silently beneath the sand, as it had for centuries, and for the first time, Daniel wondered whether some doors should never be opened. The morning sun rose over the desert, painting the dunes with golden light. The heat pressed down, but the air felt different today, heavier than usual. Daniel noticed it as he stepped toward the excavation site. The sand seemed still, almost waiting. The workers moved cautiously, avoiding the area near the tomb entrance as if they could feel the presence beneath. Professor Harris, however, remained undeterred. His eyes were bright with excitement, and he adjusted his tools, preparing to explore. The newly uncovered stones. We are on the edge of history, he said. Every step we take brings us closer to the unknown. We must keep moving. Daniel admired Harris's dedication, but could not shake a growing unease. From the moment they had uncovered the doorway, the air had felt different. Even the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel glanced at Musa, who stood quietly. At the edge of the pit, the older man's eyes were dark with warning, and his hands rested lightly on a staff. He had said little since the previous day, but his presence spoke volumes. As they dug deeper, the stones beneath the sand revealed more carvings. They were intricate, filled with symbols and figures Daniel could not fully understand. Some seemed to tell a story of power and conquest, while others carried warnings that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. Daniel sketched each one carefully, trying to capture their shapes exactly. The carvings seemed to shift in the light, creating strange shadows that danced across the walls of the pit. The workers, though brave in the beginning, grew restless. Several refused to continue, moving to the shade of nearby rocks or whispering prayers as they worked. Daniel noticed their glances toward the tomb, filled with caution and fear. Even the men who remained at the site seemed to sense something watching them. Though no one admitted it openly. Around midday, the temperature rose sharply. The desert sun blazed, and the air seemed to thicken. Daniel paused to drink water, noticing that the shadows at the tomb entrance were darker than they should have been. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something just beyond the stones. He blinked, and it vanished. He told himself it was a trick of the light, but a small shiver ran down his spine. Harris continued his work, leaning over the stone doorway. Look at this, he called, pointing to the carvings. These markings are unlike anything we have ever seen. They are warnings, yes, but they also tell a story. I am certain this tomb will reveal a civilization we never knew existed. Daniel stepped closer to the stones, examining the patterns. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, a sense that they were stepping into something much larger than themselves. He touched the carvings lightly and pulled his hand back. Quickly, the stone was warmer than it should have been, almost as if it had absorbed the sun's heat and held it inside. Musa approached quietly. The ruler beneath this tomb is not forgotten, he said softly. He waits. Those who disturb him will feel his presence. Respect what lies here. Leave it undisturbed, and you may leave the desert safely. Push further, and the consequences may not be what you expect. Daniel looked at him, torn. He wanted to continue the work, to record every detail, but the older man's warning could not be ignored. He glanced at Harris, who seemed oblivious to the unease surrounding them. The professor's excitement blinded him to the danger that Daniel felt in the air. By late afternoon, the team had uncovered the edges of a larger chamber beneath the doorway. The stones were carved with even more complex patterns, and the air grew heavy as they descended. Daniel noticed a strange stillness. The desert wind had stopped, leaving the valley in complete silence. The only sound was the scraping of tools against stone and the occasional murmur of the workers. Suddenly, a small gust of wind rose, swirling through the pit as if it had a mind of its own. Sand whipped around them, and the workers stepped back, shielding their faces. Daniel squinted, trying to see what had caused it. It seemed to come from the tomb itself, as if something inside had exhaled after centuries of silence. The workers murmured in fear. One man whispered that the tomb was alive. Another muttered that the ruler's spirit had awakened. Musa raised his staff and motioned for everyone to stop. Do not ignore the signs, he warned. The tomb remembers those who enter. It tests you. Leave now, while you can. Daniel felt a chill in the pit. Despite the heat of the sun, he wrote quickly in his notebook, recording every detail. The air was heavier than normal, and the strange gust of wind had felt deliberate. He remembered the stories Musa had told about the ruler, a king who had defied the old gods and sought immortality. The warnings carved in stone were not just decoration. They were meant to protect something powerful. Harris, however, was undeterred. We cannot stop now, he said, his voice firm. History waits for no one. These signs are natural. Wind, sand, shadows. Nothing more. Daniel looked at him, unsure. He respected Harris, but he had seen the unease in the workers, heard the old man's warnings, and felt the strange weight of the desert round them. Something was stirring beneath the stones. That evening, the camp was quiet. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the sand. Daniel sat near Musa, who spoke softly of the tomb's history. The king buried here was not an ordinary man, Musa said. He defied the gods, sought power beyond life itself. The people feared him and sealed him away. The chest beside him contains what he could not take to eternity. Disturb it, and the balance will shift. Respect the tomb, and it will remain silent. Disrespect it, and you will feel the consequences. Daniel nodded, feeling the truth in the words. He had always believed in discovery, in knowledge, in the excitement of history. But now he understood that some things were meant to remain hidden. The desert had preserved this tomb for a reason. That night, Daniel could not sleep. The wind whispered across the dunes, carrying the faint sound of movement from the tomb. In his dreams, he saw the ruler rise from his stone bed, eyes glowing, watching over the valley. He awoke with a start, heart pounding. The desert was calm again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The next morning, Daniel approached the pit with caution. Harris was already examining the stones, full of energy and determination. The workers stayed back, uneasy. Musa watched quietly, his eyes dark and serious. Daniel placed his hand on the edge of the pit and felt the warmth of the stones again. It was more intense than yesterday, almost as if the tomb was responding to their presence. Daniel took a deep breath. He realized that the desert had given them a warning, and he could not ignore it. They were on the edge of something extraordinary, but also dangerous. The tomb was no ordinary sight, and the ruler buried within had not been forgotten by time. The first signs were clear: the air, the wind, the workers' fear, and the heavy stones all spoke of something waiting beneath. Daniel knew that the discovery of the tomb was only the beginning. The desert had revealed its secret, and the world they knew was about to meet a story that should have remained buried. The sun hung high over the desert, bright and relentless. The sand burned beneath the workers' feet, and the air shimmered with heat. The camp was quiet, except for the sound of tools scraping against stone. Daniel felt a tight knot of tension in his chest. Today was the day they would finally uncover the tomb fully. Professor Harris had been working tirelessly for days, moving stones, recording every symbol, and carefully marking the edges of the doorway. His energy never seemed to fade, though the workers grew exhausted under the desert sun. Daniel, too, felt drained but determined. He wanted to witness history, to understand what lay hidden beneath the sand. Musa stood at the edge of the pit, his staff planted firmly in the sand. His eyes were dark and serious. He said nothing at first, only watching. Daniel could see the worry etched on his face. The older man had warned them repeatedly about disturbing the tomb, but Harris would not listen. The professor's ambition blinded him to everything else. As the team cleared the last layer of sand, the outline of a massive stone door emerged. It was covered with carvings unlike any Daniel had seen before. Figures of men and gods, strange symbols and spirals that seemed almost alive decorated its surface. The sunlight fell on the carvings, casting sharp shadows that made the symbols appear to move. Harris stepped forward, examining the door with eager hands. "This is it," he said. "The doorway has remained sealed for centuries. No one has touched it. Imagine what we will find inside." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. The door was large and heavy, but there was a strange warmth coming from it, as if the tomb itself had been waiting for this moment. The air felt thick and still, and the desert round them seemed to pause. Even the workers, usually busy and talkative, were silent. Musa finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Do not open it. Leave it sealed. The ruler inside has been sleeping for centuries. Disturb him, and you will not know what follows." Harris shook his head. "History cannot wait," he replied. "We will proceed carefully. Nothing is more important than knowledge." With great effort, the team pried the door open. It moved slowly, groaning under its own weight. As if it resented being disturbed, Daniel held his breath as the gap widened, revealing darkness inside. A rush of stale air escaped the tomb, carrying with it a faint, earthy smell. It was the smell of something untouched for centuries, something that had been waiting in silence. The workers hesitated, stepping back. Musa held his staff in front of him, his face tight with concern. Daniel felt the air press against him, heavier than the outside world. It was as if the tomb itself had come alive. Harris crouched at the entrance, peering into the darkness. Careful, he said. We must go slowly. Document everything. Daniel followed, torch in hand. The shadows danced on the walls as he moved inside. The carvings on the doorway continued along the interior walls, depicting a story of a ruler who had sought great power and defied the gods. Daniel felt a chill as he read the images. Though he could not fully understand them, deeper inside, the chamber opened up. Gold and bronze glinted faintly in the torchlight, and stone statues of strange figures lined the walls. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, unlike anything Daniel had studied before. Every object seemed to carry weight, as if the hands that had made them had imbued them with purpose. At the center of the chamber lay a sarcophagus carved from black stone. Its surface was smooth, polished, and cold to the touch. Beside it rested a black chest, small in size but radiating a strange presence. The carvings around the chest depicted warnings, symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. Musa stepped forward, shaking his head. This is what I warn you about. Do not touch the chest. It belongs to him, and he does not rest lightly. Harris ignored the warning. We will examine it carefully, he said. Daniel, make detailed notes. This may be the greatest discovery of our lifetime. Daniel hesitated, staring at the chest. He felt a pressure in the air, a force he could not explain. His hand shook slightly as he began to sketch its shape. The carvings around it seemed alive, moving in the flickering light of the torches. He felt a strange awareness, as if someone or something was watching him. The workers murmured nervously, stepping back. Some whispered prayers. Others avoided looking directly at the sarcophagus. Musa stayed near the doorway, muttering under his breath, his staff tapping lightly against the stone floor. Harris carefully lifted the lid of the black chest. A faint glow seemed to come from inside. Daniel shielded his eyes, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. The chest contained small objects, delicate and intricate, shaped with care and filled with unknown power. Ancient tools, ornaments, and scrolls filled the space, each item seeming to hum quietly in the silence of the tomb. Daniel's pulse quickened. He had seen many artifacts in his life, but none carried the weight that this chest radiated. It was not just history, it was presence. Almost alive, he remembered Musa's words and felt a shiver run down his spine. Disturb it, and you will feel the consequences, the old man had said. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed through the chamber. Daniel paused, listening. The sound was low, almost like breathing, but deeper than any human voice. The workers froze, looking round nervously. Harris frowned, trying to locate the source. The air grew colder. Even though the desert outside was hot, Daniel felt the weight pressing down on him, heavier than the stone above. The carvings on the walls seemed to shift, their shadows lengthening and twisting as if moving of their own accord. Musa stepped closer to Daniel. You see now, he whispered. The tomb is not empty. The ruler's spirit still watches. Be careful. He does not welcome visitors. Daniel nodded, gripping his notebook tightly. He understood now that history was not only about discovery, it was about respect, about understanding that some secrets had been hidden for a reason. The tomb had been preserved for centuries, and the ruler within had been waiting. Harris, however, remained focused on the chest. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and he did not seem to notice the change in the air. Daniel watched him carefully, realizing that ambition could blind even the most careful of men. The tomb waited silently, its shadows deep and still. The treasures it held were remarkable, but Daniel could feel the warning carried in the very air around them. Every step they took was measured, and every glance seemed to attract attention from unseen eyes. The desert outside was silent, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what the men would do next. Daniel knew that opening the tomb was only the beginning. The ruler's story was etched into the walls and preserved in the chest, waiting to be understood. But understanding came with a price. The desert, the tomb, and the ruler's spirit all seemed to remind him of that truth. He stepped back slightly, glancing at Musa and the workers. Their fear mirrored his own. They were standing at the edge of history, yet Daniel realized that some doors, once opened, could never be closed completely, and the tomb, silent for centuries, had begun to speak. The tomb was silent, yet the air carried a strange weight. Daniel could feel it pressing on his chest as he stepped carefully over the smooth stone floor. The walls were covered in carvings that seemed to twist and move in the flickering torchlight. Every time he looked at them, the images appeared slightly different, almost alive. He shivered, gripping his notebook tightly. Professor Harris moved ahead, examining every object with meticulous attention. His excitement was clear. But Daniel noticed that even Harris seemed a little unsettled by the atmosphere, the strange heaviness of the air, the faint hum that filled the chamber, and the subtle shadows made it impossible to ignore that something extraordinary, and perhaps dangerous, was present. The workers were uneasy. Some whispered to one another, their voices trembling, while others refused to look directly at the sarcophagus or the black chest. Even Musa, who had guided them through the desert and had warned them repeatedly, seemed more alert than usual. He paced near the doorway, tapping his staff lightly against the stone floor, his dark eyes scanning every shadow. Daniel tried to focus on his notes. He recorded the carvings, the objects in the chest, and the unusual temperature changes in the air. The heat and cold seemed to shift unpredictably. One moment, the chamber felt warm from the sun outside. The next, a sudden chill ran through the stone floor, and he could see his breath in the torchlight. As the team worked, strange occurrences began. Tools left on the floor would be moved when they returned, though no one admitted touching them. Torches flickered as if blown by invisible winds, yet the air was still. Daniel heard whispers, soft and unintelligible, echoing through the stone corridors. Each time he looked up, there was no one there. Musa shook his head. "Do you hear it?" he asked quietly. "The tomb speaks to us. You must be careful. Do not anger the ruler beneath these stones." Daniel nodded, though he had no idea what to do. He felt that each action they took was being watched. The chest, in particular, seemed to radiate a presence, and every time someone approached it, the temperature around it shifted slightly. It was as if the tomb itself was responding to their intrusion. Harris, however, dismissed the unease. "We are uncovering history," he said firmly. "Every unusual detail is part of understanding the past. Do not let fear guide your actions. Observe, record, and study." But even Harris could not ignore the oddities completely. When he bent to examine the carvings near the sarcophagus, a low hum seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. He looked around nervously. "Did you feel that?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes, I felt it too. The floor vibrates sometimes, almost like a heartbeat." Musa shook his head. "That is no ordinary vibration," he said. "The ruler beneath watches. You cannot ignore it." The workers grew increasingly anxious. One of them whispered that the tomb was cursed. Another said he felt hands brushing against his shoulders, though he was alone. Daniel tried to comfort them, reminding himself that fear could play tricks on the mind, yet, deep down, he could not shake the feeling that they were being observed. That night, the camp outside the tomb was tense. The desert wind had risen, carrying sand that swirled around the tents. Daniel could not sleep. He sat outside, staring at the moonlit dunes, thinking about the events of the day. The tomb was more than a collection of artifacts. It was alive, with history, warning, and perhaps power that they did not yet understand. He remembered Musa's words, "Disturb the tomb, and you will feel the consequences." Daniel realized that every strange sound, every shift in temperature, and every movement of shadows could be those consequences beginning. The following morning, the team returned to the tomb. Daniel's heart pounded as he stepped inside. The air felt heavier than before, and the shadows seemed darker, deeper. The carvings on the walls twisted in ways he had never seen. The figures appeared almost human, as if watching the intruders. In silence, the black chest at the center of the chamber drew everyone's attention. Harris was already kneeling beside it, examining the contents carefully. Daniel approached cautiously. Every object seemed to hum faintly in the torchlight. Small tools, ornaments, and scrolls lay arranged as if waiting for discovery. Yet Daniel felt an invisible barrier that warned him to tread lightly. Suddenly, one of the torches flickered violently, throwing long shadows across the chamber. A soft, whispering sound echoed through the air. The workers froze, looking at each other with wide eyes. Musa stepped forward, raising his staff. The ruler's presence is strong now. He is warning us. Leave the chest untouched. Harris, determined as ever, leaned closer to the chest. Daniel grabbed his arm gently. Professor, please. He whispered, we should stop. There is something here that we do not understand. Harris hesitated, glancing at Daniel. For the first time, he seemed unsure. The hum in the chamber grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. The shadows shifted again, and the carvings appeared to move toward them. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Something ancient and powerful was aware of them. The workers murmured prayers. Some refused to go any closer, stepping back toward the doorway. Musa's face was pale and serious. He muttered under his breath, warning the tomb to let them leave unharmed. Daniel realized that the tomb was not just stone and treasure. It was a guardian of history, alive with the memory of the ruler who rested inside. Hours passed as Daniel documented everything. The air remained heavy, the whispers constant but unintelligible. Every movement seemed watched. The tomb was no longer simply a place of discovery. It had become a test. Every step, every glance, every touch was noticed. By evening, the unease had grown. Daniel could see the strain on the faces of everyone present. Even Harris was less confident than before, pausing frequently and glancing nervously at the shadows. The chest remained untouched for now, but the pressure in the air suggested it would not stay quiet forever. Daniel stepped back from the tomb and breathed deeply. He realized that history was more than knowledge. It was respect. The tomb had survived centuries because those before had left it alone. Now, they were intruders in a place that was not meant for them. Musa approached, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You feel it too, he said quietly. The ruler is aware. He is patient, but he does not forgive easily. Leave soon, and you may go unharmed. Stay, and the tomb will remind you why it should never have been disturbed. Daniel nodded. He understood the warning. The unease, the whispers, the shadows, the moving carvings, and the heavy air were all signs that the tomb was alive with history and with power. They were visitors, not owners, and the tomb would decide whether they left safely or not. As the desert sunset, painting the sky with red and gold, Daniel made a decision. They would continue documenting, but they would proceed with caution, respecting the tomb and its secrets. The unease was not just fear, it was guidance. The tomb had shown them that discovery came with responsibility, and that the ruler beneath the stones still remembered the world outside. The tomb waited silently, shadows stretching across the walls. Daniel felt the presence of the ruler stronger than ever. He knew that the unease was only the beginning, a warning of what could come if they failed to respect the tomb. And deep down, he understood that history was not only about what was uncovered, but also about what remained protected. The desert outside was calm, but inside the tomb, the air felt heavier than ever. Daniel walked slowly, his torch casting long shadows on the walls. The carvings seemed to move in the flickering light, telling stories of power, conquest, and warnings. Every step he took made him feel as though unseen eyes were following him. The tomb was no longer just a place of history. It was alive, aware, and waiting. Professor Harris knelt near the black chest, carefully examining the objects. Within, his excitement was tempered by the strange sensations around them, but he refused to acknowledge the unease. This civilization is older and more advanced than we imagined, he said, pointing to a small, intricately carved figure. Everything here is deliberate. They left messages for us, warnings we must understand. Daniel nodded. though he was distracted by the shadows. They seemed to shift with every movement, sometimes stretching across the walls, other times curling toward him. He felt the weight of the tomb pressing down, as though it wanted him to notice, to understand that the ruler buried here was not simply a memory, but a presence. Musa remained near the doorway, his staff tapping lightly against the stone floor. He watched carefully, eyes dark and serious. The ruler was powerful, he said quietly. He sought immortality, defied the gods, and used knowledge no mortal should wield. He was punished, sealed, and watched over by the desert itself. That is why he remains. Disturbing him carries consequences beyond what you imagine. Daniel shivered. He could feel that the tomb was a place of judgment as well as history. Every artifact, every carving, and every shadow seemed to reinforce the warning. He returned to the sketches, documenting every detail, but his hand trembled slightly. The chest held objects of incredible craftsmanship, but they radiated a quiet intensity that made him hesitant to touch them. Harris, however, continued. He lifted a small scroll carefully from the chest, unrolling it with trembling hands. The text was written in an ancient language, symbols Daniel did not recognize. Even so, he could feel the weight of the message, as if the words themselves carried meaning beyond comprehension. The scroll seemed to hum faintly, vibrating with a presence he could feel in his chest. "Look at this," Harris said, his voice almost whispering in awe. "This is knowledge lost to time. This ruler left instructions, stories, perhaps even spells. Everything was sealed with care. He wanted the world to remember him, yet he wanted it controlled. Every symbol, every object is part of his plan." Daniel leaned closer, his eyes scanning the carvings on the walls. They depicted battles, rituals, and figures of authority. The ruler was shown as commanding armies, receiving offerings, and performing acts of power that Daniel could not fully understand. The images were vivid, alive in the TORCHLIGHT. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the chamber, low and vibrating. It was almost like a heartbeat, slow and steady. The workers froze, whispering prayers. Daniel felt the vibration in his chest. It grew stronger, as if the tomb itself was pulsing, aware of every movement and every breath. Musa's voice was calm but urgent. "The ruler knows you are here," he said. "He does not act quickly, but he watches. Every intrusion is noticed, every object moved recorded. Respect the tomb, or you will awaken consequences that cannot be stopped." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He realized that they were dealing with more than history. The ruler's story, his power, and the tomb's presence were all intertwined. They were not simply uncovering the past. They were interacting with it, and it responded in ways they could feel but not fully see. As they explored further, Harris uncovered another artifact, a small crystal carved with delicate patterns. When he held it, the light from the torch seemed to bend around it, creating faint reflections on the walls. Daniel noticed that the shadows grew deeper near the crystal, stretching toward them like fingers. "This is remarkable," Harris said, his voice filled with awe. "The craftsmanship, the materials, everything points to knowledge far beyond what we know. This ruler had power and understanding that perhaps no other mortal has had." He left reminders of his intelligence and his presence in every corner of this tomb. Daniel traced his fingers along the carvings near the sarcophagus. One figure, larger than the rest, seemed to watch him with intense eyes. He could feel a strange connection, as if the ruler beneath the stone was aware of his thoughts. The presence was subtle, but it pressed on his mind. He realized that the tomb had preserved more than objects. It preserved essence, memory, and vigilance. Musa stepped closer, his voice low. The ruler was not evil, though he defied rules. He sought knowledge and power, but he paid the price. That is why the tomb exists, to remind us, to protect us, to warn us. You feel the presence because it is meant to teach respect, patience, and humility. Daniel nodded. He felt the truth in Musa's words. The tomb was a living history lesson, a test of courage and understanding. Every artifact, every carving, every vibration of the air carried a story and a warning. They were witnessing the ruler's influence without even touching the sarcophagus. Hours passed as Daniel and Harris documented everything. The air grew cooler, and the light shifted in the chamber as the sun outside began to set. The shadows seemed longer, deeper, and more deliberate. Daniel felt a growing awareness that the tomb was alive with the ruler's memory. It observed, judged, and responded to their actions. Finally, Harris leaned back, breathing heavily. "We have uncovered incredible history today," he said. "The knowledge here will reshape everything we know about this civilization." The ruler left lessons, stories, and artifacts that speak across centuries. We must protect this discovery, study it carefully, and share it wisely. Daniel glanced around the chamber. He understood that the tomb was more than a site for discovery. It was a guardian of history, preserving the presence of a ruler whose influence stretched far beyond death. The black chest, the sarcophagus, the carvings, and the objects were all part of a larger story. A warning and a guide. Musa nodded slowly, as if approving Daniel's understanding. "You see it now," he said. "Respect the tomb, honor the ruler's memory, and leave with wisdom. Those who ignore the lessons will learn them the hard way." Daniel took a deep breath, looking at the chest once more. He realized that history was not just about uncovering objects or reading stories. It was about understanding, respect, and the acknowledgement that some secrets carried power beyond the mind's comprehension. The tomb had waited for centuries, and now it had revealed its truth, teaching lessons they would not forget. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Daniel glanced at the sarcophagus and the black chest. The air remained heavy, but it was no longer threatening. It was a reminder, a presence, and a story preserved for those who approached with caution and respect. The tomb had shared its secrets, but it had also reminded them that the past carried power that could not be ignored. Daniel realized that the desert had given them a gift, a lesson in humility, respect, and the patience to understand history fully. The ruler's story was complete, yet it remained eternal in the carvings, the chest, and the very stones of the tomb. And Daniel understood that some discoveries were as much about wisdom as they were about objects or knowledge. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the dunes with gold and orange. Daniel stood near the tomb, his notebook in hand. The air was calm, but the weight of the past lingered. The events of the last days had left him thoughtful and cautious. The tomb had revealed secrets, lessons, and power that he could feel but not fully understand. Professor Harris was busy arranging tools and artifacts. Though the chamber had revealed much, he remained fascinated by every object. Daniel watched him, understanding the professor's excitement. But he also knew that the tomb demanded respect above curiosity. The black chest, the carvings, and the sarcophagus all held reminders that the ruler's presence was still there. Quietly observing, Musa approached, walking slowly across the sand. His eyes were dark and serious, reflecting both concern and approval. "You have seen it," he said quietly. "The tomb has shared its history and its warnings. Remember the lessons it teaches. Do not take more than you need. Respect what was preserved for centuries, and the desert will protect you." Daniel nodded. He understood now that discovery was not only about knowledge, but about responsibility. The tomb had been waiting for centuries, preserving its secrets. For those who approached with care and humility, those who ignored the warnings would face consequences. Those who listened could carry its lessons beyond the desert. Harris, unaware of the deeper lesson, continued examining objects in the chest. Daniel hesitated, watching the faint shimmer of light around some of the carvings. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him, reminders of the ruler's presence. He felt a subtle pressure in the air, a sensation that had grown stronger over the past days. It was a silent warning, not of anger, but of caution. The workers had gathered near the entrance, their faces tired but relieved. Some whispered prayers, thanking the desert for allowing them to leave safely. Others simply stood in silence, reflecting on the strange experiences they had witnessed. Every one of them had felt the weight of the tomb, the presence of the ruler, and the lessons of the carvings and artifacts. Daniel moved carefully to the sarcophagus. Its black stone surface was smooth, cold, and heavy. He ran his hand lightly along it, feeling a subtle vibration. It was not threatening, but it was alive with memory and history. He realized that the ruler's influence had survived centuries precisely because the tomb had been respected. Now, there were visitors who had learned the tomb's lesson. Musa raised his staff. "It is time to leave," he said. "Do not linger. The desert has watched over the tomb for centuries, and it will continue to do so. Take only what is necessary for study, leave the rest, and the tomb will remain protected." Harris reluctantly agreed, understanding that the desert's influence could not be ignored. They carefully documented the carvings, the chest, and the sarcophagus. Every detail was noted, every artifact examined briefly, and then left in place. Daniel felt a deep sense of respect as he worked. They were historians, but now they were also witnesses to something beyond ordinary understanding. As the team moved toward the entrance, a soft wind rose through the valley. It carried the scent of hot sand and stone, but also a sense of presence, as if the desert itself was acknowledging their careful departure. The shadows on the walls shifted one last time, stretching and curling, before settling back into silence. Daniel looked back once at the tomb. The black doorway seemed darker than the surrounding stone, yet it carried a quiet majesty. The carvings glowed faintly in the torchlight, a reminder of the ruler's story and the lessons preserved for those who could understand. He realized that the tomb was more than a historical site. It was a guardian of memory, a teacher of patience, respect, and humility. Outside, the workers gathered their tools and prepared to return to the camp. The sun was high, but the desert felt different, as if it had recognized their understanding. Musa walked beside Daniel, his eyes scanning the dunes. "You have done well," he said quietly. "The tomb has tested you, and you have learned its lesson. Carry it with you. The desert remembers everything." Daniel nodded, feeling the truth in Musa's words. The desert was not only a place of sand and heat, it was a keeper of secrets, a guardian of history, and a force that demanded respect. The tomb had waited for centuries, and now it had shared its story with those who approached carefully and humbly. Harris continued to examine the chest, reluctant to leave. Daniel touched his arm gently. "Professor, we must go," he said. "The tomb has given us what it wants. It is time to respect its boundaries and return." Harris hesitated, looking at the glowing carvings one last time, then nodded. He realized that their work was not only about discovery, but about understanding limits. Some knowledge could be observed and recorded, but some could not be possessed. The tomb had made that very clear. As they stepped out into the sunlight, the desert seemed calm and welcoming. The air no longer felt heavy, and the wind carried warmth across the dunes. Daniel looked back one last time, feeling a mix of awe and relief. The tomb had taught them its lessons, and now it returned to silence, waiting for the next respectful visitor. The workers began their journey back across the dunes, carrying notes and sketches, but leaving the artifacts behind. Musa led them, guiding their path carefully through the shifting sands. Daniel walked beside him, reflecting on the past days. They had uncovered history, yes, but they had also learned a deeper truth. Some things are preserved not for discovery alone, but for respect, caution, and understanding. As the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows across the dunes, Daniel felt a sense of completion. They had seen the tomb, documented its secrets, and survived its tests. The ruler's story was preserved, the lessons were clear, and the desert remained as vast and mysterious as ever. Musa paused on a dune, looking back at the valley. "The tomb is safe," he said. "It will remain hidden, preserved, and respected. Remember what you have learned here. History is not only about what is discovered, it is about what is honored." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of those words. He realized that the desert and the tomb had given them something far greater than knowledge. They had given wisdom, a lesson in patience, humility, and respect. The tomb had been opened, its secrets observed, and its presence acknowledged. Yet it remained untouchable, eternal, and powerful. As night fell over the desert, the team set up camp for the final time. The stars glittered above, clear and bright, as if watching over the valley. Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The tomb had revealed its history, shared its power, and tested those who dared enter. They had passed the test. The desert was silent now, holding its secrets once more. The tomb waited, as it had for centuries, patient, eternal, and watchful. Daniel understood that some stories were not meant to be taken lightly, that some knowledge required wisdom, and that some tombs should indeed remain hidden. The wind whispered softly through the dunes, carrying with it the lessons of the past. Daniel felt a deep respect for the tomb, the ruler buried within, and the desert that protected it. They had witnessed history, survived its presence, and learned that true understanding came not from possession, but from reverence. And with that understanding, they left the valley, carrying the story of the tomb and its lessons into the world. A tale of history, respect, and the quiet power that waits in the sands.